there guys, and welcome back. Today on the show I'm going to show you how to use scrap material to make your own tent pegs. So I'm sure you've been in a situation where you were using 2x4s and you ended up with a little scrap cut off piece and you had nothing to do with it, so it just got chucked off to the side. And for me, normally this stuff ends up in the burn pile. And I was trying to think of something I could do with it, and that's when I sort of came up with this idea of how to use some of these end cuts to make some tent pegs. So that's what we're going to do on today's show. And what you're going to want to do is get some of your scrap end cut pieces like this, and you want to get a few pieces and cut them to a 12-inch length. Well, I've got some pieces cut now. They're at 12 inches. I ended up with 6 of them with the scrap that I had kicking around. And the next step you want to do is take one of your pieces, and it doesn't matter which one, but on this one edge here, you want to measure down 2 inches and put a mark, and then just get your square and put a line along that 2-inch mark. Now this is strictly for setup, so you only have to do it to one piece. So now that we've got that line here at 2 inches, we're going to take it over to the table saw. So the first thing you want to do here at the table saw is you want to put in your cross cutting blade, and from there you want to tilt your blade to a 45. If you have a 0 clearance insert in your saw, make sure you take it out. And now this 45 isn't imperative, so I'm not even going to check it. I'm just going to go until it hits the saw stop, the angle stop, and then that's as far as I'm going to go, because again, this angle isn't critical. It's not going to be a miter, so to speak. Once you get that done, you want to lower your blade height to 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to get some Veritas setup blocks here that I've got, and I'm going to set the blade height at 1/2 inch. We've got the blade set at a 1/2 inch height. We've got it set at a 45 degree, and you might notice here, even though the camera is on the opposite side of the saw, that I've actually got my miter fence here on the right side of the blade. And the reason for that is because of where we want this cut to be. And we want the miter cut, or the 45, to go from the tip of this 2-inch line that we drew out towards our little stubby end, not towards the long end. And the purpose for this little notch is going to be to hold the rope for our tent pegs, for our tent rather. So what you want to do is you want to just slide your fence up until this 2-inch line lines up with the first tooth of the blade. And once you get that done, just get your stop set into place, and then now we can go ahead and cut all 6 2x4 pieces with this one 1/2 inch high 45 degree cut. Now with this kerf cut in our piece, this is actually to hold the rope of our tent. There's no way the rope's going to fit in there, so we're going to take another pass on each of the piece, but we're going to move our stop just a little bit. Now everyone's tent ropes vary, so you want to cut this slot here to coincide with the thickness of your rope for your tent. You want a snug fit, but not enough that you got to jam it in there. It still needs a little bit of slip. So I'm going to go ahead now, adjust my depth stop, and take another pass on these tent pegs. Now that we have all the curves cut in each piece of 2x4, we're going to return the blade to 90 degrees to the table. We removed our other insert. We're going to put in our zero clearance, and we're going to replace our crosscut blade with a ripping blade. I've got the ripping blade set to 90 degrees, zero clearance installed, and I've set my fence so that it'll just trim off this rounded edge on the 2x4 just to give us a flat edge to work with here. So I'm going to go ahead and trim one edge off of each one of these 2x4s. The one edge is cut flat on each piece, and now we've set our fence to cut a 1-inch thickness, and we're going to cut each one of these 2x4s now into 3 1-inch thicknesses. I've got all the pieces cut now to the 1-inch thickness, but what you want to do is, still with this setup here, you want to turn your piece so that this kerf is pointing towards your fence and run all the pieces back through the table saw again. So what you'll end up with is a 1-inch by 1-inch piece with this kerf still left intact. What I've ended up with here is 16 12-inch long 1-inch by 1-inch pegs, if you will, with a notch in it for my tent rope. But I don't care if you've got Thor's hammer, you're not blasting this thing into the ground. This is just too much to drive into the ground. So now it comes time to taper it. So what we're going to do is take one of our offcuts, which is of course exactly the size that we want, and we're going to make a template of sorts. From one end of our board here, or our offcut, you're going to measure in 8 inches, and at that 8-inch mark, I've left my square way over here, you want to put a line across it. Once you get that, on this end, your line is up here, so on the bottom of your tent peg, you want to put a line in at 3/8 of an inch. So measure in 3/8 from each side. Just like this. So it'll be 3/8 and 3/8. And then it's as simple as connecting the dots. So with a straight edge or a ruler or whatever you use in your shop, connect the line from 1/3/8 mark up to this 8-inch mark, and then connect the line from the other 3/8 mark to the 8-inch mark. And what you should end up with is something that looks like that. You can see the taper. We're going to take this over to the scroll saw now, and I'm going to cut this out, and then I'm just going to finish it up on the disc sander just to make sure it's a nice clean line. And this will be our template for marking out the taper on our tent pegs. I've got the taper cut, and what you want to do now is mark the taper using your template on 2 sides of your pegs. Now you just want to pay attention to make sure that your notch that you cut is at the top of the peg and that your taper is down here at the bottom end. So you'll mark it on one side, turn it 90 degrees, and then lay your template back down. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You gotta remember, this is a tent peg. You're gonna be driving it into the ground. So, and then mark it onto the second side. So you'll have one side marked, and then if you turn it 90 degrees, hopefully you can see this, you've got the second side marked. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all of these on two sides, and then we're going to head over to the bandsaw. All of our pieces are all marked, and we're over here at the bandsaw, and basically we're going to be using a method here called compound cutting. And for those of you who have been watching my show for any length of time, you've seen me do it, and most recently I believe on the cabriolet legs video. But I'm going to do one here just to show you the process, but I'll explain it first. What we're going to do is we're going to cut both lines on one side of the profile. Once we get that cut, we're going to put those pieces back into place, the offcuts. Take a piece of packing tape, spin it around it to put it back together. Then we're going to rotate it 90 degrees and cut our other profile. And I'll just show you how that works. All of the compound cutting is done and the tapers are all done, and we're just going to take it over now for the last step, which is cleaning up all these tapers on the disc sander. And there you have it. Tent pegs from wood that was destined for the fireplace out of your scrap to usable, functional pegs that you can either use for your next camping adventure or your next vampire hunt. Whatever you like. They're awesome. Guys, give this a try. One little side note, I will put, I don't know if you can see my arms there and the dust that's on this. Full dust collection and dust mask, please guys, when you're using a disc sander to take off material of this nature. You should be using your dust collection and your PPE anyway, but just a reminder, please protect yourself, not just your eyes and your ears and your fingers, but also your respiratory health as well. So there you have it, tent pegs. That's this week's show. Guys, thanks for watching, and we're going to see you again next week with yet another woodworking video.